Mental Health Monday on Radio City Talk. Tackling the stigma.
And I hope you're well. Welcome back to Mental Health Monday. It's that part of Liverpool Live mental health. There's always something in the news about mental health. There's always people contacting the show wanting to talk about mental health. And there's always plenty doing the rounds through things like social when it comes to mental health. We'll touch on all those things over the course of the show. But if people come forward and share their stories when it comes to mental health, we're more than happy to share those stories through Mental Health Monday. And one such person who'd written a blog about their own experiences of their own mental health is a regular contributor to Radio City Talk, talking about various matters, whether it's to do with his beloved Liverpool Football Club or the work that he does with the North West TUC. This is something completely different, but Jay McKenna is a voice you may well have heard before. He joins us on the programme now. Jay, thank you for your time.
Not a problem, Mick.
When people write blogs and post blogs and they go on social media and we get to read them, from our point of view, sometimes when we think, oh, should we invite them on the programme and see if they want to share their stories? Now, you're massively open about your experiences through the blog and you're happy to come and talk on the programme. If at any point you think, hang on a minute, I was writing about this in a blog in my bedroom.
No, it's fine.
No, I'm not ready to broadcast it on the radio. Absolutely, let us know. We're okay with that. Absolutely. People want to email the show, by the way, they can do mick@radiocity.co.uk. That's mick@radiocity.co.uk. You put a blog up with the title Me Mental Health. So this was mental health. You were looking at the me within it.
Yep.
Talk to somebody. You said about 18 months ago, some things changed for me. It wasn't serious as such. You wrote, I wouldn't say I was depressed or suffering with any other labelled mental health condition. I just know I didn't feel right. I didn't feel like me. I had felt like this before. It'll pass. And you're approaching the age of 29 and you found yourself in a difficult situation. Just can you take us back to that time and just maybe give us a handle of where you were at?
Yeah, I'd always, just to give a sense, I'd always been one of those kind of people that, you know, probably think, so what might I do next? But never like as a pressing thing. So been at a point in my life where I sort of, you know, was getting towards the age of 30, and not that, you know, I was daunted by the age of 30, but, you know, it's a milestone to most people and they see where they're going in life. And around that time, 18 months ago, I split up with my girlfriend at the time. I'd been asking myself this question in work, and I sort of found myself just feeling a sadness, like things I probably thought I was sure about, I suddenly then felt unsure about. So didn't quite know what it was meant to be like, what was going to happen next. And that uncertainty happens, you know, we all have that at some point in our life. And as I say, I'd had that previously. I'd had, you know, as things happen in the past, relationship breakdowns, job changes, you know, your home life and ups and downs within that. I'd always felt, you know, little times where you just feel down and sometimes passed after a couple of days. And at that time, I'd just thought, well, okay, you know, I've had a lot going on. I'm wondering what I want to do next. My relationship, you know, circumstances have changed. And I was just at this point where I was thinking, oh, that's, you know, a bit of a downer. It's a bit rubbish, innit? And I just noticed that where I'd probably thought, oh, this is why I'm feeling sad, I wasn't quite sure why I was feeling sad. I didn't sit there thinking, I feel sad because of X, Y, Z, and then doing something else didn't necessarily make me feel happier. But I just put it down at the time to think, you know, this will pass. You know, the end of the year, it's autumn, it's winter, you know, it's dark and it's dank, and everyone's thinking of Christmas. I was like, oh, this will pass. You know, see friends and stuff like that. This will pass. This will just be a moment or a period in my life, and it'll pass. Was the thought of where I was at that time.
I mean, I guess, and there'll be a lot of people who relate to that. The idea that, you know, if your mental state is, you know, out of 10, and 10 is very happy, 1 is very sad, that most people, even at normal level, when they're just getting up out of bed in the morning, find themselves at a 6 or 7. Generally, people are quite optimistic. It's quite something when you find yourself in a 4 and you're suddenly thinking, hang on a minute, or a 3 maybe, and your normal is now just generally you feel a bit down when you're doing normal stuff where you would have thought, I normally feel all right doing this. Now I feel a bit down. Yeah,
absolutely. So I talk about this in the blog, but I'd thrown myself into, I was going to Australia, my mate there. I had to fit into that suit regardless, so I had to go to the gym. And I threw myself into that, and I found myself, that routine probably helped, but I never sort of felt anything from it. You know, there were days where I'd feel happy, days where I wouldn't, but you're right, I never quite sort of experienced those 6 or 7 out of 10s. I never felt normal, and I go on to talk about that in the blog later on, and when I went and sought help and spoke to somebody, we had exactly that kind of thing. They give you a sheet and you're marking yourself out of 10 on some things. And I think, and again, I talk about this in the blog, I wasn't quite sure I needed to go and get help. And then when I sat there and I filled that form in and answered some of those questions myself about how I felt out of 10 on different things, I realised I absolutely did need to speak to somebody, because I was scoring low on some of the things, and it reminded me really difficult to just go along with things. And again, one of the things I talked about in the blog is I probably think I hid it from people better than I did, and yet when I've spoken to family and some friends since, they've said, like, you know, you could tell you weren't happy, but I think they weren't quite sure why. And instinctively, despite this clearly very public persona I have, because I come on here and talk about Liverpool or work and stuff like that, I am quite a private person in that respect and don't like to talk about it. So when I was sort of finding myself having these rubbish days, and those days become weeks sometimes, I didn't feel like I could talk about it. I didn't actually identify it in my personality, because I see I have this personality and I have this private life, but I didn't quite identify that I'd become this probably other personality as such.
What do you mean in the blog when you say what stands out most, though, is I actually didn't know anything? This idea you didn't know, that you had like this yearning, you wanted information and you wanted to soak things in, and you didn't feel like you could do it anymore.
I am probably one of those people that has a desire to just know things. I want to know what I'm going to do. I didn't realise it until I properly spoke to and fully understand it until I spoke to Colin at Compass and got some help. But I'd always wanted to know the answer to stuff. I was always that person in school who wanted to answer the question and needed to know the answer. And if I didn't know it, I always wondered why. I like to just know what's going on in things. So if there's a conversation, I'd easily join in it with somebody and talk about stuff. And always people would come to me usually for advice. And I was one of those people that would give advice to friends and family. And I have a natural personality trait where I overthink things. And I think, well, if I'm going to do this might happen, this might happen, this might happen, a scenario plan, and overthink it. And that can be a negative personality trait sometimes, but it can be really useful, particularly in the job I do. Yet at this time, that just wouldn't work. It was like it just wouldn't work. So I was, for example, in a relationship, I was having a conversation about what we needed to do, if we could fix it and if we could make things better. And I was like, I don't know. And it was one of the most frustrating things, because I literally couldn't get my brain to think, what about this? What about that? What about this? How do you feel about it? Because it was so crowded. Because what had happened is, all of the things you think about in your life that maybe exist in your brain somewhere, and you put it to the back and you put it to the front, or you say it out loud and it just exists over there somewhere, and then it comes back in later on when it's important. All of those things were like clumped together. The way I described it when talking to Colin at Compass was, it was like wires next to your bed. We all have them. You plug your phone in, you plug your lamp in, your telly's plugged in, something else, your work phone charger's plugged in there as well. You never ever wrap them up together. But somehow, after a few weeks, they get wrapped and they get tight. And it's like, okay, I've got to unplug this one and pull that one. It was like that. And where you would be able to sit there and say, I'm going to undo this wire because I can see it's knotted there. I couldn't see it. And I'd literally try and pull them apart. It would be like we all do it at some point. You get frustrated. Usually probably quite a very, very male thing of, I'll just use brute strength and this will be okay. And I'd pull one and it wouldn't do nothing. And I didn't know why. And then I couldn't answer it. But then because I didn't know it, that made it worse. That annoyed me too, that I didn't know. So I got myself really frustrated that I didn't know, so I'd ignore it. And one of the things I'd done when I spoke to Colin, and when I started getting advice, and I later discovered it myself, I was finding it really difficult to just take that first step to knowing something, actually trying to understand something, and to actually saying, take this step because it might make it better. So when I did find myself having some space to think about it, I'd say to myself, okay, well, if you do this, maybe that might make it better. But then me overthinking would kick in, and this is when my personality trait to be quite negative, because it'd be like, but if you do that, this might happen, or that might happen, or you might feel like this, or you might feel like that. And it was like, that's utterly bizarre. It's like, in work respect, I'd got myself into this position where I felt I should know what my next job was going to be in work, or how I got to jobs I might aspire to do down the line. And I was comparing myself to people who are 10, 20 years older than me, as if I should know how I get there now. And then because I didn't know, I got more frustrated. Instead of maybe sitting down with them and having a conversation saying, how did you get to where you got? I just couldn't see that clearly. I just kept sitting there, and I remember having conversations with the person I spoke to about at the time, my girlfriend now. I literally just kept saying to her, when she'd ask me a question, and she found it probably very surprising, as someone who's always got something to say, I just kept saying to her, I don't know. And that was the hardest thing for me to deal with personally.
You talked about your age, looking at the age of 30, not that it was like a daunting age as such, but people might have experienced, the midlife crisis, getting to like 50, 55, where you think about the things maybe you should have done when you're a little bit younger, never got the chance, maybe you get a little bit more disposable income, and people talk about, the jokes about the leather jacket or the convertible car. But actually the age of 30 is one of those which, and I've gone through that age relatively recently myself, where you think, this is the point where I think I'm supposed to have done things by now. Like, am I supposed to have been in a nicer house by now? Am I supposed to have a nice big back garden for my house? Have summer barbecues with kids running around? Are you supposed to, have a car? Are you supposed to be able to financially look after yourself and your family without relying on, the back of mum and dad and things like that? And I wonder whether or not there's an element of that with young people, because whenever you look at the flashpoints of where young people are, it's that period up to the age of 30 to 35. Where I wonder whether or not there's a midlife crisis thing where it kicks in, where almost life seems to happen a little bit later. You're not 22, married, full-time job kids anymore. Some people are now getting to the age of 30 and thinking, well, I've got this far because this is how old I've been, this is how long I've been around. But I don't know really where I'm going. Am I really just conning a living? Am I still on the blag a little bit? Is someone going to find me out? And I wonder whether there's a lot of people who go through that experience. And 30 is the age where you think, well, they'll find out soon. Yeah, this will be the point where someone will clock on.
Absolutely, Mick. And I think because we don't have this conversation about where we actually should be in life, or people, you mentioned it before on Instagram, and I was guilty of it in the time when I was feeling like this. I'd look at other people's lives and be like, they're out and they're doing this and they've got, they seem happy. Is it normal that I feel like this? Is it normal? Does anyone else have these things? And I got so worked up by that. I genuinely believed at a time that someone could just come along and tell me the answer. That someone could just come along and say to me, Jay, it's fine. This is normal. And I genuinely thought that would make me feel better. And I couldn't get to that point. But I think, looking back on it now, I think it's absolutely right that, in what you say, we don't know what life's meant to be like. We don't know what our position in life is. So we sit there and say to ourselves, well, I've got this job, and maybe I've got this job a bit early. You look at other people and you think, they're actually better than me. Where do we go next? And I had this with work. One of the conversations I spoke to when I went and got help was, I was looking at other people coming in and I was like, they're better than me at this. And I didn't know what my place was anymore. I didn't know what I was wanting to be about, because I'd stopped living in this sort of for now period, and I'd gone through this sort of change. I was very much one of these people who, and I still am to an extent of, just live for now, anything can happen, just enjoy it, and I almost always just had an eye to the horizon, or glanced towards the horizon, but I never made too many, future plans and stuff like that. But then I'd suddenly got too close to this age, and I'm thinking, right, there'd been a little catalyst, a little change where I was thinking, okay, well, what about the rest of my life? What about work? What about relationships? And then I didn't know. And it got compounded, and it was like, and it's why I called it Talk to Someone, because I actually think one of the things that's come out of this for me, everybody, I think, asks themselves some of these questions I was asking myself. They don't know the answer to some things, and for some people that becomes a mental health problem, as it did for me, and others it doesn't. And this was one of the reasons I was unsure about writing it, because I was like, are these just everyday things? But we should actually just have a society in which we do get to talk about these things. And one of the points I make towards the end is about rich people. And you watch shows like Billions, and there's these hedge fund people, and they have a therapist. They can just go and talk to in work for 45 minutes and say, oh yeah, okay, I see that now. And I just think it'd be a fascinating world in which we just had honest conversations about how we feel. One of the things I've said to my mates who've all said to me, you do know you can come and talk to us, and you can come and speak to me about things. And one of the things I say back to people at the minute is, We all do it. I come in here before and I'll say, all right, Mick, how are you? And the instinct of us is to just say, oh, I'm good, yeah, I'm fine, sir. And you might be a bit more honest with some people, oh, tired being up with the kids, or oh, busy in work and stuff like that. But you never sit there and say the things that you probably have been thinking, like, oh, you know what, I've had this mad thought in my head for a few weeks about what I should be doing about work next. I'm worried they're going to find me out. And you might sit there and say, well, you know what, fully enough, so have I. And either they haven't, or that's just, that's something I used to deal with, and that's something I used to think, and I've discovered that, everyone has this, they have this self-doubt about themselves. So I think that's why I think just talking to people generally about your thoughts and feelings at any one time probably stops some of it getting to this point.
I wonder whether or not, that the idea is you're talking the blog about existing. You existed, and I wonder whether or not there's a dangerous thing, particularly around that age, but, people at all different ages will experience that sometimes you feel like your only moment of clarity might well be that maybe this is just it. I go to work, I come home, I eat, sometimes go to the pub, sometimes won't. I'll feel good, I'll feel bad. This is just it. And there's almost something, I don't know if you're looking at it from an entirely holistic view, or you're, like some sort of Zen moment that you've had in your life, but I think for some people that's a frightening thing, where you suddenly go, oh, well, maybe this is it. Maybe this is what life is. I'm 30 now, been the same for 10 years or so. It's going to be the same for the next 30 years or so. You almost like stare into a void, and you're not necessarily entirely keen on what you've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I one of the words I used, and I was talking to Colin, it was just in general as my life as a package of like, is this it? Do you just, as some older generations often say, and I've heard people say, you just settle. This is your lot in life, you just settle for it. It's like, is it? Does it have to be? Ask questions. This is where it got compounded. It's like, well, does it? If I'm not happy now, or something else I can do to make it happier, is there something else I can do to make it better? And one of the examples I gave to Colin when I went to speak to him, I've got a map on my wall. I bought for me a scratch map. You scratch off the places you've been to. And because of where I was at in this moment in my life, and I've been to a fair few places, my goal is to have that entire map scratched off. Yet when I looked at that map, I was never looking at the places I've been to and thinking that's really good. I was looking at the places I haven't. And then I'd been to Lisbon early in the year for my 30th, and similarly, I was thinking, where do you want to go for things? And I was always looking. I really enjoyed it. It was really good. But because of how I was feeling at the time and stuff like that, I'd have this nagging thought in my head, have I missed something? Was there somewhere better I could have went to, somewhere that not everybody else has been to? Was there another thing I could have seen or done? And it was almost like I was chasing something that I didn't, you were looking for this other happiness, this it kind of thing. But you're almost not knowing what is normal, what it is. So you can always be seeking something else. And I think, we had to try and create a space in which people can actually say, you know what? No, I've actually done some really good things. I've seen lots of things. And I think that's where you get into that dangerous world of the comparison to other people's lives. Of you see someone going somewhere that you haven't been yet, or buying a car that you'd like to buy, and you think, wow, they've got that. But then they may well be, you mentioned you've had people on here, Instagram models, they may well be looking at your life that you think's relatively mundane, but they might be looking at your life of, but isn't that really nice? You've got someone to go home to. And this is where I felt really bad about ever speaking to someone, because I know I've got a really good job and I get paid a good amount of money to do something I love. And whenever I thought about the idea of talking to someone about how I felt about some of these things, I always imagined, and I knew rationally I shouldn't because I tell everybody else to do different, but I kept imagining they'd say, what's he got to worry about? And it's the same thing, with the Anne Lennons of the world and stuff like that, these millionaires, as if like your wealth or your position in life means you can never have these self-doubts and these moments of, where you just need to talk to someone or don't quite understand what's going on.
You mentioned Compass in Liverpool, an organisation you reached out to, and as well as Colin. Colin. The man I used to call him to everybody. He's like a mystical figure, I think, within the blog.
He is, and I tried to write that as I felt it. A lot of this was just spilling thoughts onto a page at first, and when I read it back, I was like, he doesn't have a name. He is the man, because I kept it quite private that I was going to speak to someone my girlfriend knew, and my manager in work knew, and a friend in work knew, and then ultimately another friend. There were only 4 people who knew up until I wrote this blog. I had to go and tell family and that before I published it. And it was like it was it was really good in going to speak to him, and he felt like this separate mystical thing because it was my place where I went to talk, and I told people bits I wanted to tell them, but I didn't have to tell them everything. It was a place where I got to go and say things out loud and listen back, and he was, you know, I'd never had a conversation where he called him Colin. He never called me Jay. We literally just spoke at each other like we knew each other, and he was a sounding board, and he challenged me back, and he said things, and one of the really useful things that he had was, I'd say lots of things, I'm still not quite fully understanding them, then he'd say something back, a phrase or a sentence, and I'd be like, that's it, you've literally distilled the thoughts. And he is almost mystical in this way, because I wanted to know things, he would say it, and I'd be like, he knows the answer. And it was an incredible range of emotions going to speak to him, and I genuinely am thankful for the work they do. And when it come to a point in time where I knew I was reaching the end of going to see him, you know, we started off conversation, you know, where I think I'm at to talk to him. And, you know, I always thought I got mental health. I do. I've been close to people who've suffered with their mental health over the years. And I know the services are stretched, and I always felt bad about going to use them, thinking, do I need them? But I'd reached a point at them, and I genuinely am so thankful for the fact that they were there and I had someone to go to speak to, because I think, looking back now, I know if I'd have waited, and me and Colin had an honest conversation about this, I know if I'd have waited, I wasn't at that point, but it very easily could have slid into something worse, whether that be depression or more. It could have slid into something else, because if I just sat there and I'd stopped acting on anything, that I would have just felt sad where it got to.
Radio City Talk. Tackling the stigma.
Yeah, Mental Health Monday this week. We've got Jay McKenna with us in the studio. He is somebody who's sharing his story. He's also blogged about it. We'll point people in the direction of the blog as well, so that people can have a read of it themselves. It sets out his journey, how he was feeling, how he approached an organisation called Compass in Liverpool, and ever since he's put it out there as well. He feels the need now to write to Compass to apologise for the number of people who might be contacting them. As a result, we talked about the mystical Colin as well. That moment, the first moment you sit down with somebody, do you sort of scan across somebody and think, right, you're going to psychoanalyse me now, or you're going to make me say something? Or
They were really good, Compass. When I write about this again in the blog, on the way to it, I kept thinking I needed to cancel. And the only thing that actually stopped me cancelling going to the appointment was they'd given me a form, but it didn't have a phone number on to ring and cancel. And I know how mental health services are stretched, and I would have felt really bad if I'd have cancelled the appointment that someone else could have had. And it was only for the fact that I didn't have their number, I didn't cancel on the way to it. So I went to it, and I didn't know what to expect. And the first person who'd done an assessment would just ask me some questions. It was really nice and conversational. And I used to go to these appointments with Colin, it's the first couple particularly. I was like, I don't know how to start this. And then I'd say a sentence, and it was like, in the first appointment, it was a bit like a dam bursting, because he'd just probe, and he'd ask a couple of questions or make a couple of comments. And then even then, in the weeks afterwards, I'd say, oh, like last week, I don't know how to start this one. And then there'd be, you know, I'd say a sentence, and it'd start to sort of flow from there. I was never worried he was assessing me. I think because of how they do it with you, but also how I'd done it with myself and how it appeared in my head. It's like job interviews. I go for a job interview, and I always say to people, it's a conversation. They're asking questions of you. You know, you can take bits of paper in. You can talk about things you want to talk about. You know, it's a two-way process. And when I was sat with Colin, it genuinely just felt like a conversation. Clearly one where I spoke an awful lot more, and he distilled things I said into shorter sentences that made it make sense and made me think about things. And he challenged me on some stuff, and there were times where I was upset, but it felt like a conversation, somewhere where I could go and talk to someone who got it, who understood. And, you know, I was always worried about going to talk to anyone else, because I didn't want them saying, oh, well, I know what that's like because of X, Y, Z. And it's like, you might, but that doesn't feel like that in my head. You might not know what it's like. It is unique. And one of the things Colin always said to me, I remember opening one of them up, he said, how'd you feel this week? And it just threw me, and I was like, well, I said, I don't know whether to say this. I said, but I feel normal. And I felt really bad saying that, as if like it's not normal to feel like this. And he said, no, it's normal to you individual to you. You know, so your mental health is individual to you, and that's why I called it the way I did in the end. Me, this is not me. It's my experience. It's the way I witnessed with mental health, and there'll be similarities with others. And if it was a really nice setup, and I've been asked this by other people who've wanted to get in touch with Compass. People asking me specifically, what's it like to go in a room? What's because that can seem quite daunting to some people, and it was genuinely a relaxed environment. It was a place where I didn't at any point feel uncomfortable at all, which, given how I'd built this up to a point, was really, really good and really supportive.
Compass are the name of the organisation based in Liverpool as well, and details about them are included actually in Jay's blog, and he puts his thanks on record for them for that too. When you were leaving those sessions, how were you feeling once you'd had those conversations? You talked at the start about trying to untangle the wires. Was Colin the person you go? I guess if you had some tangled wires, you go, yeah, mate, hold that while I just try and loosen these a little bit.
Yeah, I kept talking to him in sort of like metaphors and analogies at times, and the way I can best describe this to people, I had all these thoughts in my head, and use that word. I had all these thoughts in my head, but when I spoke to Colin, they stopped just existing in my head, and I'd place some out there, and we'd come back to them weeks later. But also, we just had a conversation where because I said them out loud and someone listened to me and tried to help me understand them, they didn't just exist in my head anymore. And little steps along the way where I did tell people in work and stuff like that, and I spoke to Colin about specific certain issues. It was like a pressure valve, and he was just helping me release it, not all in one go, sometimes more than in others, but he was helping me get into things. And there were, even after a few weeks where I was thinking, okay, I've talked about lots here, I felt infinitely better, I felt weight off my shoulders. He clearly knew there were still some things to probe, and one of the things he talked to me about was I'd been fearful about some things, which was something I'd never really thought, but clearly had felt, but I just never acknowledged it or never realised it. And when he said it, and I sort of took a moment, and there was things where we'd have just natural pauses where I was just letting it sink in. It was a place in which he helped pull out the things that needed to be pulled out. So when you talk about those whys, he helped, maybe help you identify where the knot was. Wouldn't undo it for you, but help identify where the knot was and maybe what was causing that, and talk about those things. And it was a process where I knew I clearly had gone on a bit of a journey in the 12 weeks or so that I'd been going to speak to him, and he'd taken me from a point where I felt I didn't know any of it to the end where I felt I was in a place where I could at least write about it and now obviously talk about it to people.
Talk to Someone is the name of the blog. Mental health with the highlighting on the me included within it. Jay, where can people read the blog? Where can people?
It's on my Medium. It's on. If you follow, I'll tweet it myself and pin it at the top of my Twitter for a bit. If you follow at Jay McKenna at Jay McKenna 87, not 97, at Jay McKenna 87, it'll be on there. I'll tweet it to the Radio City account, and you can share it with people there as well.
And we'll get that included in our social media. It's already on the at Radio City Talk account, and we'll get a link as well on the podcast if people want to check that out. radiocitytalk.co.uk/Mental Health Monday. You get a link there to the audio boom, Jay's story, and all the other stories we've been talking about on Mental Health Monday. Great to get you on today, Jay. Really appreciate you coming on board. Thanks for sharing your story. We're normally talking about UD matters. We're normally talking about Liverpool Football Club matters as well, but that's your voice talking in a very different context as well, and I think people will appreciate you being so open and honest with us on the programme.
Thanks, Mick. Hope it helps some people.
Jay McKenna on this week's Mental Health Monday. Now, we're heading into a bank holiday Monday next week as well, so we'll certainly be back in 2 weeks, but there's always other things on the agenda, so if you want to check out previous editions of Mental Health Monday, you can do so via the podcast, radiocitytalk.co.uk/Mental Health Monday. You'll actually see it on the homepage, actually, where you can follow links and listen to previous editions of the programme.
Radio City Talks Mental Health Monday with Mick Coyle.